Not so long ago, I did a ranking of all of Ridley Scott's movies, and I was also joined by Jack Petrie and Clayton Humbert over at Ages of Film. The two of those, they're separate channels. They did a ranking of Ridley Scott as well. We put them out together on the same day, and we thought, you know what? Let's do his brother, Tony Scott. 16 films Tony Scott has made. And yeah, we're all going to rank them, and we're putting out our videos today. I think I'm probably going to be last or first. I can't remember which way we're doing it, but either way, those guys' videos may already be out, or they may be coming after this one. I'm not sure we've decided yet. But yeah, 16 films, 3 ranking videos. This is mine. Now, for anyone who's been paying attention on my channel, I have recently put out some polls. I did like a bracket, Tony Scott bracket, to find out what you guys thought Tony Scott's best film was and what some of his worst. I wasn't quite able to do a complete ranking on your guys' thoughts using those brackets. It was a bit too complicated, but I certainly can tell you which one you thought was the best and which ones got kicked out in the first round. Some surprises for me and some that were not that much of a shocker, gotta be said. But yeah, I'll as I go through my ranking, I'll give some of your guys' thoughts on these movies as well. So let's get to it. 16 movies, starting with number 16. This is my least favourite, the worst of the worst when it comes to Tony Scott, and that is Domino. This is the one film on here that I would genuinely say I hate. If not for making this ranking, I probably wouldn't have gone back to this. It was a long time ago since I watched it, but I thought, you know what? If I'm doing a ranking, I need to be fresh, so I watched it again. It was every bit as bad as I remember it being. It's practically unwatchable as far as I'm concerned. It's a one-star film, and it was painful to get through. It's one of the most obnoxious pieces of filmmaking I've ever seen, and to have it come from a director who I actually quite admire, such as Tony Scott, yeah, that's quite depressing. Woefully miscast. You've got it's about these, supposedly based on a true story about these bounty hunters, the central one, Domino, played by Keira Knightley, and she does not sell the role at all. I'm sorry. She's great in period dramas. She's great in, you know, like lavish dresses and all that. When it comes to being a hard as nails, kick-ass bounty hunter who takes no crap from anyone, I don't buy it. I don't buy it at all, especially in this role. She's terrible in it. But the worst thing is Tony Scott's editing choices. Whoever edited this movie wants shooting, quite frankly, because it was just, yeah, frenetic, like to the most obnoxious degree. And for someone who's got echolalia, it was even more so, because he kept on doing this thing where characters would speak, and then to be like edgy and cool or whatever, it would echo what they just say. So they'd say something, and then all around the surround sound, it would echo back what they just said. And I'm just like, why are you doing that? What purpose does that serve? It serves zero purpose. It's just MTV style theatrics that serve no purpose. And it's like that all the way through this movie, which is filled to the brim with characters that I do not like, do not care for, and have no wish to follow. It makes all the attempts possible to try and be something akin to a Quentin Tarantino movie, but it doesn't have Tarantino writing the script, and so it fails epically. Number 15 for me, and this is probably a controversial choice, it's Top Gun. Now, I love Maverick. The sequel is phenomenal. One of the best films the year it came out. Absolutely excellent blockbuster movie. You won't hear any arguments from me there. The original Top Gun was great when I was a kid, and then I grew up and I watched it and I was like, it's actually not that good, is it? It's actually quite MTV. Again, it's that MTV music video trappings that, you know, plague Scott's worst movies. And I genuinely think this is one of them. I can't ever foresee me wanting to watch Top Gun again. After the last time I watched it, it just didn't hold that much water for me. It's a lot of camp, a lot of cheese, a lot of, again, music video editing, really lightweight story. The story for this, there's elements in it that work, like from a a character arc perspective, but it shouldn't be in a 2-hour film. Like a 90-minute movie, all of this stuff could be told in a 90-minute movie, but it's just padded out with all this machismo, cheesy nonsense that it just makes it feel extremely light. Just a really light affair. I don't see the appeal all that much. I don't even think the action sequences hold up all that well. Again, like I say, back when I was a kid, it was great seeing planes fly around and fighting each other. Now it's just like, after watching Maverick and you see how a modern movie of this sort can be shot, this just feels somewhat anticlimactic. I just don't think it's that good. I really don't. And yet, apparently I'm wrong, because this made the final four. Not only did it make the final four, but it came second out of those four in the voting. So according to you guys, or the majority of you guys that voted, it is better than The Last Boy Scout. It is better than Man on Fire. And in the rounds before that final, it beat out Enemy of the State. I'm sorry, I don't think it's better than Enemy of the State. And it beat out something... Days of Thunder, which, as you can see, I've got higher than this because I've not mentioned it yet. But yeah, I think Days of Thunder is better than Top Gun. Sue me. Next up for me at number 14 is Beverly Hills Cop 2. Now, this has got some lovers. Some people really love this film. It came far too close in the bracket with Last Boy Scout, which will be very high up. I'll say right now, Last Boy Scout will be very high up on my list. And I think for it to have come as close as it did to knocking Last Boy Scout out in the first round, I think that's insanity to me. I think Beverly Hills Cop 2 is not a good film. Love the first one. I think it's really tightly paced. This is saggy. This second one, it's saggy. It's just how many situations can we put Motormouth Eddie Murphy into and just have him do his thing, just like, parroting on and like... We get it, it's supposed to be funny, and for some moments it is, but after a while it does actually get a bit annoying, again, a bit obnoxious, and the writing is just no way near as good as the first one either. It all feels just kind of cobbled together in a rush. And we get to the end and we've got like our heroes literally mowing people down with guns. They're just mowing all these bad guys down. They're running. They've given up. They've got their hands up in the air. Some of them may be running, and they get shot in the back. And it's like, I'm sorry, but that crime scene or that scene of what's just happened is going to be investigated, and there's going to be answers needed from internal affairs. So they're going to want to know why these people have been shot in the back on the way out, and yet nothing's said of it. Nothing, it's just like, it's playful. It's like, whatever, the bad guys have been vanquished. Yeah. Really? Like, just lapses of logic like that, where there is no logic to this film. This film was made by a bunch of people who are clearly too high on coke to have any clue that the stuff on the page needed a few more rewrites. The writer's room literally must have consisted of, hey, wouldn't it be funny if Axel Foley was in a meeting with someone and this happened, and wouldn't it be funny if Axel Foley bumped into this person and this happened, or he said this. Hey, that would be a funny line, wouldn't it? And then we'll just string all them together. Like, that's the way this film seemingly was made to me, because the script is pretty atrocious. Like I say, matched up with The Last Boy Scout. Last Boy Scout won that vote 55% to 45%, and that is way too low. Last Boy Scout should have hammered this film. And number 13 is Revenge, starring Kevin Costner and Madeleine Stowe. Madeleine Stowe being one of my favourite actresses of the 90s, like the 90s period. It's like she was one of the ones that was like, I just always gravitated towards. As an earlier film for her, and you know it's average. There's nothing special. It's nowhere near as bad as you know the films that I've mentioned on this list. It's just it doesn't particularly reach the heights of some of his best work either. It's just it's there. I can watch it. I can be entertained by it, but I'm like, okay, I don't need to watch that again, but if I catch it on TV late one night, I wouldn't necessarily switch it off. It's a revenge flick. It's all in the title, really, isn't it? It's called Revenge, but it suffers somewhat from the fact that none of these characters are truly moral. The revenge is done by a gangster type against this guy who he thought was his friend, played by Costner, who has an affair with his wife. And it's so right there he's made bad choices. Now, does that justify the actions that the gangster guy takes against him and the wife? No, not at all. And when he violently attacks the two of these people, he loses any sense, for me at any rate, of having any kind of moral high ground. But fact of the matter remains, this guy shouldn't have had an affair with his wife. But then again, he should have treated his wife better. So you see what I mean? It's a bunch of amoral characters getting revenge against each other, tit for tat, and by the end of it, it's just like, okay, cool, whatever. I do think there is a little bit of a commentary in there, something of a feminist take about how it is the women that always suffer. The men kind of, both, not to ruin the ending, but the men essentially both get out of this relatively unscathed, shall we say. It doesn't end the way you would think, I don't think. And I think there's a very deliberate commentary being made there that in all these kind of machinations between men, it's always the women that pay the price. Now, in the first round of the bracket that I posted on my channel, this was up against The Hunger. It beat The Hunger, moved through to the second round. As you can see, Hunger I've not mentioned yet, so I actually thought it was better. So again, I kind of disagree with the majority on this one. However, I would hazard a guess that is mostly down to people not seeing The Hunger. I reckon more people have probably seen a film starring Kevin Costner and Madeleine Stowe than some obscure first film from a director starring, Catherine Deneuve and David Bowie. That's a little bit more, I would say, niche. So, like I say, maybe that's the reason Revenge went through and The Hunger didn't, but it's still a bit of a head scratcher to me. Not too much of a head scratcher though, because at number 12 is The Hunger. The debut film from Tony Scott. It definitely has more of an art house vibe about it. It's out of all his films, I would say this is the one that separates itself most from the rest of his work. It doesn't necessarily feel like a Tony Scott film so much as a Ridley Scott film. Like if you told me this was an early Ridley Scott film, I would very well believe you. It just has that tone about it. That kind of, certainly the art decoration and the cinematography and the way the sets are lit. It just, very much feels like more of a Ridley Scott film than a Tony Scott film. Now, the performances in it are all really good. It's a vampire film, like a weird kind of modern take on the vampire mythology that for the most part I find quite intriguing and I quite like. There's some stuff in there, though, that just gets gratuitous, this lesbian love scene where it's just like, okay, do we need to see it in that much detail? It just feels like titillation. It feels like nudity for the sake. It feels like it's made by a bunch of high school boys. He's like, oh, let's get two girls kissing. It's just like, okay, whatever. fine. It doesn't really add a right lot to the story to prolong this sequence out the way they do. It just feels a bit pervy, to be perfectly honest. But as far as debut movies go, I've seen much worse. Number 11 is Spy Game, starring Brad Pitt and Robert Redford. Now in the first bracket, the first round of my bracket, this went up against True Romance. I don't think it was a shocker to anybody that this lost out. It was kicked out in the first round, which is a shame because actually, as you can see, I prefer it to quite a few of the other movies from Scott's career. It's like a political thriller type movie, and it may be again a little bit overlong, but I actually think it does some pretty decent work with the characters. This is one of the movies of Scott's that I came to last. I watched just for this ranking. Most of the rest of his work I'd seen multiple times before. This was one of the ones I just had to kind of fill in just to make sure I'd seen everything he'd done, and I was quite surprised by. And the reason I'd stayed away from it for so long is that it just looked like it was going to be quite bland. You know, a lot of those like mid-90s or late 90s Brad Pitt films often have a bland kind of look to them, or to me at any rate. And yet, as with something like Meet Joe Black, that has that same kind of blandness about it from the trailers and from the prospect of watching it, it actually turned out to be pretty good. You know, quite engaging central characters. You know, it's a spy thriller about the man on the ground, which is played by Brad Pitt, taking his orders from the people back in the US in offices, the likes of Robert Redford's character, and it's about the bond that builds between them despite the fact that there are times when the Pitt character is called on to do things that he doesn't actually believe in and sometimes refuses to carry out. So it's like, will these two men be able to come together and you know, enough to put aside like whatever orders they have or whatever their job description might be in order to do what is morally right. And number 10 is Scott's remake of The Taking of Pelham, 123. Yeah, starring John Travolta and Denzel Washington. Denzel Washington, always good for my money, quite frankly. I'll watch anything with him in, one of my favourite actors. Travolta can be a bit hit and miss. It depends on the calibre of the film, not necessarily him as an actor. You know, that's not to say he's a bad actor, but like he definitely requires the right director. Otherwise you end up with, yeah, The Fanatic, things like that. I like The Taking of Pelham 123 up until the final act. I think Scott and everybody on board do a pretty good job of building the tension, filling it out with all these side characters that all have their own different like takes on things and agendas and positions of authority and things like that. And I think he manages all that pretty well until the final act. And I think that, the conclusion in particular is quite dissatisfying. I just don't like the way where it goes. There's something that happens right at the end between our central protagonist and antagonist where I'm like, oh, okay, what he's just done there would require some emotional work, some therapy maybe after going through that. And we just end with our central character like putting his jacket on and going off home, picking up the milk, and you're just like, really? Like, that's just okay. I don't buy it emotionally. Just character-wise, it just fizzles out. It's a film that has a nice run, but then just fizzles out. Now, this was up against Unstoppable in the first round of the bracket, and it came very close indeed. It was like 47%, 53% in favour of Unstoppable. So this only just very narrowly missed out beating Unstoppable and moving through to the next round, which I think is crazy, to be honest, because I think Unstoppable is a far superior film. And number 9 is The Fan, starring Robert De Niro and Wesley Snipes. Snipes plays this like football player, top of his game, real celebrity, big-headed, Feels like one of them people you kind of want to slap, who's just like doesn't really appreciate what he's got. And then you've got Robert De Niro's character, who, while a few rough edges at the start, he seems like he wants to be with his kid. He wants to. He's a fan. He's a fan of the game, and he appreciates it. It seems quite likable. And then as the film progresses, your ideas about who each one of these men is kind of swaps, and you realise that while yes, Snipes' character has a lot of foibles and a lot of faults, he isn't someone who isn't willing to change. He isn't someone who ultimately can't learn from those faults and go somewhere else. Whereas the De Niro character, just gets more and more fanatical, more and more dangerous, more and more twisted, and it's definitely a slow burn in the sense that this isn't like a big action film with with an antagonist going up against the protagonist and like the two of them blowing stuff up. And it's more of a thriller. It's more of a character study of who these two men are. Looking at their daily lives before they even really meet. Their first meetings are via phone call, and it takes them quite a while before they actually meet each other on screen. Because, again, as I say, it's more of a study of these two lives and how they're going to eventually intersect. So that might be quite boring to some people. I think to me, way back when I first watched it, it was quite boring. It wasn't the film I was anticipating or wanted. I want something with a bit more psychosis, a bit more like, these two guys going at each other, and it isn't really that. Coming back to it all these years later, watching it again for this ranking, I was surprised by how much I was invested in it, how much I liked it, how much I got hooked by these two different characters. And how much I was rooting for both of them to change. I think films like this, one of the keys of making them well is, even though you have a character is the bad guy and it isn't going to end well for them, there's always this seed within you that wants them to change. And you see all these opportunities where they could go one way, but they go the other, and you're like, you made the wrong choice. And I like all that stuff, and I think this film does a pretty good job of doing that. For me, The Fan is possibly Scott's most underrated movie. I think this would be on the bottom of most people's lists, or certainly near the bottom. Number 8 for me is Days of Thunder, often called Top Gun with cars. That is essentially what it is. I'm not going to deny that, but I like it more. I prefer it. I'm more invested in the characters. I think racing cars feels more, relatable, I guess, to the common man such as myself than ever flying planes. It's not that. I just think it's the characters. I enjoy the characters in this more. I'm more in tune with the central character and his personal growth, and the fact that he's having to get over this fear of getting back in the car, which, again, Top Gun, fear of getting back in the cockpit after losing your partner. I'm not unaware of just how similar this is to Top Gun. I just feel like if this had come first and it was reversed, I think people would be a lot more favourable to this film. In the bracket, this was matched up in the first round with Top Gun, and Top Gun annihilated it. It was not even remotely close. Definitely, most people prefer Top Gun over this. I am in the minority, it's got to be said. I just prefer it. It feels a lot more grounded to me in more ways than the obvious. I also think the race sequences are impeccably shot. There's some car race sequences in this that really hold up even today. That are very, have a lot of energy to them, a lot of a sense of danger about them. I like the Robert Duvall character particularly. I like the relationship, this kind of father-son dynamic that kind of develops between him and Cruise's character. And because of that, I just gravitate to it a lot more. Number 7 is Deja Vu, another Denzel Washington film, a time-traveling film. I mean, the time-traveling element kind of comes out of nowhere, to be honest. First time I watched this, I didn't rate it quite as highly as I did this time around, because I wasn't expecting the time travel element, to be perfectly honest. And it became a bit of a head scratcher. I was like, hang on a minute, what's going on now? What are they asking me to buy into? This isn't the film I thought it was. And I spent a lot of time trying to catch up with what they told us, and I think that confusion got me to the end of the film in kind of like, okay, that was some cool ideas, but I could have done with a bit more information going in to be prepared. And having that preparation this time around, I was able to pick up on a lot of the things, you know, a lot of the concepts and the ideas around the time traveling element that made me understand it a lot better. And I went along with the ride a lot more, again, as I say, this time around. So I actually think that's not a spoiler to tell someone that I think knowing about the time travel element going in is very helpful, I would say, for this film. But yeah, it is a little bit like, you know, From Dusk Till Dawn, when you go in thinking you're watching this gangster film and then all of a sudden it turns into a vampire movie. It's not necessarily what you signed up for, but once you realise you're in it, you're like, oh, okay, I can go with this. Some really good action set pieces in it, a really likeable central character in the Denzel Washington character, and yeah, just some good. Again, it's the time travel element. I love the way they use it. Like, there's a whole sequence where there's a car chase, but it's not really a car chase because the person being chased is in a different time period to the one doing the chasing. But so, like I say, if you've seen the film, you know exactly what I'm talking about, and it's not quite as confusing. But there's definitely a bit of a I could imagine Christopher Nolan doing something with that would be pretty spectacular. It's a good film. It's much better second time round than it was first time around. It got beat in the first round of the bracket by Man on Fire. Again, another one that got annihilated by the film it was up against. But I think that's just by virtue of how good the film was that it happened to be up against. Number 6 is Enemy of the State. Now, shockingly, to me at any rate, this knocked out Crimson Tide in the first round. I really like Enemy of the State, but I think it's insane that it beat Crimson Tide personally. But yeah, this is one of them films that has aged pretty well, to be honest, like a fine wine, and feels a lot more relevant today than it did back when it came out. When it came out, I didn't quite buy it. There's a lot of stuff that happens in it, like in terms of how the surveillance teams are able to track Smith's character, where I'm like, nah, I call BS on that, to be perfectly honest. And yet now we have that technology. Now it doesn't seem like such BS. It doesn't seem so out of touch. It doesn't seem so unrealistic. So yeah, watching it fairly recently, I was like, you know, this holds up pretty well. And actually, it's quite on the money in terms of what they can do with surveillance. Now, it was eventually knocked out by Top Gun in the bracket, which, as you would imagine, I think that's insanity as well. As insane as it is for Enemy of the State to knock out Crimson Tide, I think it is equally insane for it to get knocked out by Top Gun. Number 5 is Unstoppable. This, as I've already mentioned, just about knocked out Taken of Pelham 123. It was eventually knocked out itself by The Last Boy Scout. Now, I really like Unstoppable. For me, it's a perfect Friday night movie, popcorn film. It's energetic. It's got very likable central characters. I think the tension just keeps mounting and mounting in a really good way. There's no obvious kind of villain, human villain. There's a few characters who you think, what a douchebag kind of thing, but no like out and out villains. The train itself is kind of the villain. I think it has a lot of really great minor characters, again, all around the peripheries of the film, that are handled so believably by the performers and from the script, that I believe what's unfolding. I believe everyone on screen. I believe they are who they, who they're playing. And Rosario Dawson, always watchable. I always like Rosario Dawson. Yeah, it's just a fun ride that always keeps the tension up. Every time I watch it, I'm like, oh, come on, get there. And I know how it's going to end. So for me, that's a good sign that I still do that when I watch it. Yeah, just Scott on really great form. And this was his last film. So for me, he did go out on a high. It's just like little character beats, like, the guys who fumble at the start and are the reason that the train ends up going off and on its own, and it's just like it's a really stupid thing, but it's believable because I've worked with people like that. These imbeciles who think they can coast and don't understand that actually no, if you coast and something happens, that's it. People's lives are in danger, and it's just I've worked with these people. It's like, and I think some people would watch this and go, oh, they'd be well more trained than that. But this stuff happens, and just like, it's not that these guys are unlikable. It's not like they're evil or bad. They're just lazy. And it's little things like that. And there's like other characters that have certain interests, or their mind's too focused on this particular thing rather than that particular thing, which is, again, it's believable. They're not evil, they're not bad. It's just that's just life. That's just people for you. So for me, that's where the strength of the film lies, is in all the characters across the board and how they're portrayed. Number 4 is Man on Fire. For many people, this is Tony Scott's best film. I got a lot of comments during the bracket saying that this is, they think, Tony Scott's best film. It's definitely up there, as I say, number 4 for me. I prefer the first half over the second half. I think the second half can fall into somewhat generic revenge thriller type territory, but not too much, not to the point where it'd derail the film or anything. But I think to a large degree it kind of earns it from the first half. The development of this relationship between Creasy, played by Denzel Washington, and this young girl played by Dakota Fanning. I think their relationship's really sweet. It's a beautiful thing to watch unfold. So when she's eventually kidnapped, you are rooting for this guy. You are rooting for him to dish out some serious dose of vengeance. And I also think the sacrifices that are made, or the sacrifice that is made towards the end of the film, also feeds into that relationship in a valuable way, in a meaningful way, a lot more meaningful than just going in there, taking them all out, Liam Neeson style, and getting the girl out at the end. It has a bit more weight to it than that because of how it plays out. Number 3 is Crimson Tide, a absolutely brilliant political thriller. This is a submarine movie. I don't tend to gravitate towards submarine movies, like Hunt for the Red October, K-19, things like that. I am quite claustrophobic. I don't like the environment. It's not fun to watch to me. But just by the sheer gravitas, the sheer weight of having Denzel Washington and Gene Hackman on screen, slugging it out verbally, so to speak, it is just incredibly entertaining and yeah, really fun to watch. And a lot of the moral issues that are raised, the moral quandaries, the questions that, would I do that? Would I not do that? Would I have the balls to do that if I know it's right? Or would I not? It's a movie about moral responsibility. It's set within the military. You have orders. You have a responsibility to follow those orders, but you also have other responsibilities outside of that. And when do you veer from one responsibility for the sake of the other? And I think this is, yeah, it's one of those movies that does a really great job of looking at that. Number 2 is The Last Boy Scout. This is just a really great action buddy cop thriller. It's in the vein of Lethal Weapon, from writer Shane Black, who wrote Lethal Weapon. He does this kind of film really well. I know this one's directed by Tony Scott, but it's definitely a Shane Black script. You can see it there. This feels very much like a Shane Black movie, and I'm a really big fan of Shane Black, particularly this, what he does. Nice guys, kiss kiss bang bang. Two guys, stick them together, put them on a case, let the banter flow. I just think it's very hard to beat Shane Black in this kind of movie. I think the script here is dynamite. Lots of great one-liners, real zingers. Bruce Willis on fine form, one of his best kind of roles. I think it's great. I think it's incredibly underrated. I didn't realise how underrated it was, to be honest, until I did the bracket for this, because anytime it kind of got through to the next round, it was by a hair's breadth. Round one, it was really close, and too close, given the film it was up against. And then in round two, it was up against Top Gun, and again they were neck and neck, absolutely neck and neck, to the point where I had to scrap that particular bracket and put those two films into the final, with the other two that went in there, which were True Romance and Man on Fire. I feel like, again, this is my number two. It's very high up for me. It's definitely a go-to film when it comes to Tony Scott. So to see it just be so close in those brackets, and then in the final bracket, it got annihilated by True Romance and Top Gun, and was neck and neck with Man on Fire. So for me, I was like, oh, okay. Still puzzled by Top Gun being so beloved. But yeah, Last Boy Scout, great film. If you love Lethal Weapon, Nice Guys, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, and you've not seen Last Boy Scout, check it out, because it's definitely in that vein. But of course, my number one and your number one, it seems, or the majority of you guys' number one, it's True Romance. I love this film. There are a couple of naysayers out there who don't like it for one reason or another. A lot of people kind of tends to be, just don't do Quentin Tarantino, so they're not going to touch anything he's in, or other little reasons that don't necessarily wash with me, but that's fine. People have their reasons, and your reasons are your reasons. But for me, True Romance, phenomenal film. At one point, around the 16-year-old mark, this was my number one film. If you'd have asked me what's your top 10 films of all time, this was number one. When I was like 16 years old. I loved it, watched it on repeat constantly for about a year or so. I used to be able to quote every line in it. I love the characters. Every character in it is dynamite, even just the little tiny bit parts like Brad Pitt's Stoner and things like that. Gary Oldman's Drexel. It's just full of brilliant lines, brilliant characters. It's really well directed by Scott. He's able to milk tension out of certain sequences, such as the face-off between Christopher Walken and Dennis Hopper. The cast is absolutely stacked. It's hard to argue against it. This was a very clear number one for me, and apparently a very clear number one for those that voted in the polls as well, because this was far and away. In the final, I had, like I say, 4 films in the final, and it just wasn't even close. This was by a landslide the winner, and then Top Gun seemed like pretty much definite second. And then, as I say, Last Boy Scout, Man on Fire were just, neck and neck. There you go. That is my ranking of all of Tony Scott's movies. Rest in peace, Tony Scott. But what about you? You may have taken part in the polls I put out on my channel. You've watched this video. Hopefully you will go and watch Jack Petrie's video. You will go and watch Clayton's video over at Ages of Film. But what about you? What are your choices? How would you rank all 16 of Tony Scott's movies? Feel free to leave your rankings down in the comment section below. Thank you for watching this review, and until next time, cracking.